Hello everyone and welcome to DC Central, and in today's video we are going to be breaking down and reviewing The Flash Season 5 Episode 12, otherwise entitled Memorabilia. And if you've not seen this episode, make sure you go and watch it before you watch this review, as it will be filled with spoilers. Don't worry, we'll still be here for you when you come back. So The Flash did not impress me last week. If you saw my review, or my rant would be a more appropriate word to use to describe that video. I was not very happy with what they did with that episode and where it eventually went, so I was very skeptical going into this episode, and I've been very skeptical about the rest of the episodes in this season, if I'm honest. But I have to be honest, this episode has been very divisive online. I've seen a lot of different opinions on it. Me personally, I quite actually enjoyed this episode. There's quite a lot of things I like, there's a lot of stuff I don't like, but there is quite a lot of stuff I liked as well, so let's dive in. So the opening scene of this episode is basically just the typical Flash comedy fluff that we've come to expect at this point. We have all the characters on an ice rink, and the only reason I bring this up is because Sherlock just absolutely steals this scene. Just the way he's skating around, it's brilliant. I really enjoy that. And also Tom Cavanagh is actually a professional skater, so that actually is why he's so good. That's not any CGI involved, there's no stunt work there. That's literally just Tom Cavanagh doing that, so that's really cool. But the reason why this scene is weird is Ralph brings up this idea, oh yeah, this office that I work next to has moved out, so it's free, you can use it for your blog. And Iris suddenly comes up with the whole idea where she's like, oh yeah, the blog's been making enough revenue to do that, which this is completely new information to the audience. I didn't know Iris was still running the blog at this point. It's never been brought up. It's just one of those things that just has come up, and Iris is like apparently running the blog again and is making a lot of money off of it, so apparently that is her full-time job. So that confuses me. It just kind of came out of nowhere, but whatever. Now, Ralph eventually comes up to Cisco and says, look, I have this informant, we can go meet him, he's going to give us some information on Cicada. So they go to the bar, and when they're there, they do talk to this guy, and it turns out that this person actually, when he talks about Cicada, is talking about a punk rock band who is playing, and not actually the villainous murderer. So this does lead Cisco to be very, very annoyed with Ralph, and it turns out all Ralph really wanted was a friend. All Ralph really wanted was to bring Cisco out for a night out on the town. But the reason why this is interesting is that Cisco actually meets a bartender at this bar who goes by the name of Camilla, and it's clear that they are setting up Cisco for a new love interest here with Camilla, and again, as I mentioned in a previous video, potentially a exit for the show for him with this new love interest. And you find out that this character of Camilla actually has a twin who is a metahuman, and this then clicks in Cisco's head that using some sort of science that he just mumbles out, that they can actually use this as the final key, like this is the final missing piece of the puzzle for the metahuman cure, and this does link into the end of the episode, which I'll get to later. So Nora is essentially in a bit of trouble in this episode, as they have decided that the way they're going to try and stop Cicada now is to get into his heart by waking Grace up, and the way to do this is to use this memory machine to go into Grace's consciousness and wake her up from the inside. So Nora eventually goes in here by herself, which she wasn't supposed to do, because it turns out that if you go in there with another person, your memories will be exposed to said person. So Nora gets worried about that. Obviously she's been talking to Eobard Thawne in the future, so she doesn't want Barry to know about that. So she goes in by herself and ends up getting trapped in Grace's consciousness. Now, this was a weird part of the story, because Grace, the actress who played her, had to do a lot in this episode, and I have to be honest, I really thought she was dreadful. I really felt like she was just this awful, awful casting for this character, given how much she had to do in this episode. I mean, I doubt she's going to have much to do going forward, but in this episode, given how much this episode relied on her and relied on that performance, it wasn't great. But what's really weird is it introduces this idea that all of these memories that you're seeing when you're inside somebody's consciousness is all from the perception of that person. So this may not necessarily be how events play out. This is how they perceive it. So when you see inside of Grace's memory, she's talking to her Uncle Orlin, aka Cicada, and she's seeing him as this awesome guy, this really awesome uncle who took her in, and things like that. That is all from her perspective. What she is looking at is how she sees the world, when that, as we know, that is not actually what Orlin is like necessarily. So again, that was an interesting thing to bring up, but I don't quite know how it works, because I feel like they were more doing that to set up the Iris scene later on. But also the other weird thing that came from this whole storyline was we see Grace as Cicada in this version of her consciousness, and this is what I'm assuming it links into what Captain Singh says in this episode. Basically, Captain Singh comes on the TV and says, yes, Cicada, he went away for a while and then he came back and now he's back murdering people again. So what I have to assume this means is that in the future, you know, Barry and Team Flash eventually do defeat Orlin as Cicada, and then Grace takes up the mantle of Cicada when she's a bit older. That's what I'm assuming that is. But this whole setup feels really strange to me because I feel like that's a future we're never going to see, so to do it in this episode and give it such an emphasis feels a bit wasted, unless they do pay this off, but I don't think they will, so it comes across very futile to me. So anyway, once the team realise that Nora is trapped inside of Grace's consciousness, Barry and Iris go in after her, and this was the part of the story I really liked. Barry and Iris going into Nora's consciousness, you know, was actually really interesting. You get to see the Flash Museum. We really get to explore the Flash Museum properly, which was really cool, really fun to go in there, seeing all the merchandise. It's pretty much filled with merchandise you could buy in real life, which was nice to see. All that memorabilia. This episode is called Memorabilia, so that was really awesome. We also get to see the Hall of Villains again, which I like. And then Captain Singh, again on the TV, making another cameo appearance, says that Cicada killed more people than Zoom and the Red Death. And the Red Death, if you don't know, is actually the Earth 52 version of Bruce Wayne, who actually stole the Speed Force from Barry Allen and became a Flash Batman crossover type of character. My apologies. So does this mean that they are setting up the Red Death to be the villain of The Flash Season 6? Well, it's definitely a possibility. They did this in Season 3. They name-dropped DeVoe a couple of times, and then we did end up getting DeVoe as the villain of Season 4, so it could be, and that would be really interesting. Obviously, they would have to change the identity, because I doubt they would actually do Bruce Wayne. But I'm going to do a full video on this later on this weekend, so make sure you stick around for that. But this whole idea of memory perception comes back into play when we see Iris actually see her future self with Nora, and from Nora's perspective, she sees Iris as this super evil mother, like just this really horrible mother who, you know, and that's why she was hostile towards her when she first showed up in this season. But then later on, we see how Iris was actually in this scene, and she's basically exactly the same as Iris normally is. So, like I say, this whole thing of the memory perception, they set it up with Grace's story, and while it didn't quite work there, I clearly see that that was supposed to be a setup for this scene, but it makes the whole Grace one feel a bit irrelevant by the end of it, so, you know, it's kind of like a double-edged sword with this whole Iris, you know, future perception thing. They also introduced this idea of defense mechanism, so if you're inside somebody's consciousness and the consciousness doesn't like you being in there, they will release a defense mechanism. So, you know, Grace's was Cicada, but Nora's was actually the Reverse Flash, and that was really cool, and that should have been a major hint that Nora has been working with Eobard Thawne. But anyway, it was really cool actually just seeing the Reverse Flash suit walking around with nobody inside of it. It was quite creepy actually, and I thought that worked really well, just to see this like suit, basically an inanimate object walking around with nobody inside of it. That was pretty cool. But this links into the scene at the end of the episode where Sherlock basically drops Nora in it and then just basically disregards it, saying, oh yeah, you need to tell everyone your secret, and then they basically back out. So, you know, I feel like everyone should have a good hint, like all the characters at this point, other than Sherlock, should have a big hint that Nora is working with Eobard Thawne, given the fact that her defense mechanism was the Reverse Flash. So, I don't know when this whole secret's going to come out, when it's going to be revealed, but it was just strange to feel like we're going to get it, and then we don't. And also, Iris does eventually open up her new office inside of the same building that Ralph works at. She seems to be starting a new newspaper, which, again, obviously she has to do to line up with the Future Crisis event. So that is all well and good. I feel like this is obviously just something they had to do, they had to cover, and it seems like this season in particular, they're really trying to focus on that, so I guess they just wanted to cover that ground in this episode. And in the final scene of the episode, we see Nora talking to Gideon, again transferring another message to Eobard Thawne in the future, and we actually see that she is basically trying to protect her parents and also trying to stop Cicada by whatever she's doing. So Nora is not necessarily evil like some of us thought. She is actually just as good as some others thought she was, but what she's actually doing is, in working with the Reverse Flash, she is in turn stopping Cicada somehow and also saving her parents and protecting everybody. So again, this whole Nora thing, we don't know what she's doing, we don't know what she's up to, we don't know what her eventual goal is, or how working with Eobard Thawne is actually affecting the present day. We just have to wait until all these questions are eventually answered, which is a bit annoying, but I guess it's just what these shows typically like to do. Overall, though, not a bad episode of The Flash, not bad at all. I do have some really big problems with it, but then I do have some positives for it as well. It's much better than last week, and you know, The Flash Season 5 has been a bit of a mixed bag so far. Like, I think it started out really strong, but the season has just kind of gone down the rabbit hole at the moment, and it kind of feels a bit like it's stuck in the Season 3, just boring element where not a lot's happening. I kind of need the season to ramp up a bit, but we are in episode 12, so I guess this is kind of the downtime. But, you know, not a bad episode. There are some cool moments in there. You know, potential tease for the Season 6 villain was exciting. Again, I'll do a video about that soon. But it's really awesome just to go in the Flash Museum, but then all the stuff with Nora and Grace, I don't like how they write Nora. You know, they writing her as like a 10-year-old really doesn't work, given the fact she's meant to be like 30. So all the different elements in this don't quite come together in the right way, but it's not the worst episode of The Flash. It's not the worst this season. It's just kind of in the middle of the road. So thank you guys for tuning into this episode of DC Central. If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss an upload, and hope to see you guys again next week.